Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Was Gott tut, das ist wohlgetan, which translates to what God does that is done well. So this is a chorale that's accompanied by a longer instrumental section, and I cut that out because I'm focusing on Bach's vocal writing. So if you're here for a complete analysis of the entirety of the piece, apologies. The point of this playlist is to look exclusively at Bach's vocal writing, so that's what we're going to do today. 1 sharp in the key signature, G major, G major. I reckon we're in the key of G major, and we start things off with 2 passing tones in the lower voices. We then have E, B, E, and G. It's an E minor triad in root position, which is 6, passing 7th in the bass, and then we have C, A, E, and A, which is a first inversion A minor triad. And then if we look at the notes on the next beat, we have F sharp and we have D, which turns the chord into D, A, F sharp, and A. That is a root position D major triad, which is where we would expect 2/6 to go. And then we get G, 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 and B, which is G major in root position. A little cadential progression here. Then we have C, G, C, and E, which is a C major triad in root position, which is a 4 chord. This G would make it a second inversion, but I think this G is this C is our root. Then we have B, G, D, and D, which is G major in first inversion. And we have this little interesting trill figure in the bass and the alto. Both of them happen to be non-chord tones, so I'll mark them now. And then we get the same 1/6 chord on beat 2, B, D, D, and D. There's this theme of the chord being continued over 2 beats, but I don't think this is a B minor chord that's happening here. I still think it's a 1/6 chord, just without a root. Then we have D, A, F sharp, and D, 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 F sharp, and D, which is a 5 chord that gets completely contextualized on the next 8th note, with a little bit of a passing 7th as well, D, D, A, and C. But I'm just going to mark it as a passing tone. And then we have an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of G major, where we cadence on 1. Then we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major at the end of the next phrase. We have E, G, G, and E, which is an E minor triad in root position, passing tones in the bass and alto, before we get G, G, B, and D, which is a root position G major chord. Interesting progression, 1/6 going to 1. Then we have some chord tones that are happening on the and of the same beat as well. We have C, E, G, and D. I guess we technically could say that there is a 4 chord going on there, but I don't think it's likely. I think this C is an accent non-chord tone, and so is that E. And what we're really looking at is what's happening on the and, D, A, F sharp, and C, which is a 5/7 chord. Then we have E, G, G, and B, so a deceptive progression going to E minor, which is our 6, passing tone in the tenor. Then we have E, B, G, and B, which is another 6 chord, late passing 7th in the bass, and some non-chord tones in the tenor as well, before we get C sharp, E, G, and A. That is A7 over C sharp, which is 5/6/5 of 5, the dominant and first inversion of D, which is our dominant, D, D, F sharp, and A, which is D major, root position dominant triad, passing 7th in the tenor, and then we cadence on G major, which is our tonic. Okay, looking ahead, there were a couple of, I think there was only one fermata that didn't make it into the chorale right here, one set of them. And then we have G, D, G, and D, which is a tonic triad without a 5th, but we won't analyze anything like that because it is what it is. And then we have an interesting passage, kind of a sequential section. Da, 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 da. And really, it kind of feels like there could be a fermata here, but there isn't. The phrase continues all the way until this D. So we get C, C, G, and E. That's a root position C major triad, which is 4, passing tone in the bass. Then we have E, B, G, and E, which is E minor, root position 6 chord. And then we have some passing tones, or non-chord tones. Actually, neither of them are passing tones. They're just non-chord tones. One of them's an anticipation. The other one's like a, what would you call it? It's not really an appoggiatura because it's happening on an off beat, but it's leapt into and stepped out of. So this makes the chord A, C sharp, G, and E, which is A7 in first inversion, again 5, 6, 5 of 5, before we go to D major, D, A, F sharp, and A, which is 5. In the key of D major, if we analyze this, this is 2, 5, 6, 5, 1, with a neighbor tone in the bass. And then we have D, D, F sharp, and A again, which is another 5 chord that this time has a passing 7th in the bass. And then we get B, G, F natural, and D, a bit of a dominant turnaround from Bach, where we have, instead of 1, we have 5, 6, 5 of 4. And instead of immediately going to 4, we actually go to D, B, F, and D. And if we look at this beat, we have 7, 6 of 4, because B diminished is our leading tone chord of our subdominant. However, I really do think that you could just say 5, 6, 5 for this, or just 5 in general for this entire phrase, because 7 and 5 are more or less interchangeable for one another because they share 2 tones in common and they both function in a dominant fashion. So when we see 2 dominants that follow one another, I look at the whole gesture as just one large dominant, because that's effectively what's happening. But taking out the non-chord tones, we have some passing tones in the lower voices. This B is a chord tone, this C is not, this D is, and then we get our resolution to C major, C, C, E, and G. And this feels kind of like a subdominant imperfect authentic cadence, either some type of imperfect authentic cadence or like a subdominant cadence that I've talked about in previous videos, where whether this C is our tonic or whether it is still our subdominant, it kind of feels like it's getting some emphasis here. But regardless, when we move to the G on the next beat, G, B, D, and B, I think this is where we modulate to the key of D major, because our phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence, kind of / half cadence in the key of D major, but it sounds more like the key of D major, even though the D at the end feels dominant by the time it gets recontextualized as the dominant in the new key. But this G major chord is going to be 4 in the key of D major. This E is a non-chord tone. This G is a chord tone. We have C sharp, E, G, and A again, another 5, 6, 5 chord. This time it's not a secondary dominant, it's our primary dominant. And then we have D, D, F sharp, and A. They're non-chord tones, but they still contribute to a tonic triad on the offbeat. We then have B, D, F sharp, and G, which is G major 7 over B, 4, 6, 5. And then we have some more non-chord tones. We have C, C sharp, A, and we have E and G, again with another 5, 6, 5 chord, this time happening on the off beat. I don't think we see a root position A, no, I take that back, we have one right here at the end, but the majority of the A chords are in first inversion, and they're 7 chords. But then we get the resolution where we expect on the next beat D, A, F sharp, which is our tonic triad. This E and this G right here, I think those are both enclosing the F sharp that happens on the next beat. And then the next beat's kind of interesting because the bass changes to A, so we have A, F sharp, and F sharp, and where you might be tempted to call this a 3/6 chord, I think Bach is continuing this idea of the chord being transformed or reiterated over the course of multiple beats of the harmonic rhythm. So I really think it's more likely, like if this was given its own Roman numeral, we would call this 6/4, because we have all the makings of a D major chord, just no root. And the fact that the base of the chord is the 5th of the chord as well is also important in the way that this chord is being spelled. But regardless, we have the next beat before we have a passing tone in the alto, or after we have a passing tone in the alto. We have F sharp, A, D, and F sharp. That is a D major triad in first inversion, so we'll just mark that as 6. Should put parentheses around that 6/4 as well, before the chord gets turned into root position on the and of 4. And as we prepare for our cadence, we have A, D, and E. This D is a 4/3 suspension over the bass. It gets resolved on the next beat with the C sharp, and then we get D major, our tonic, at the cadence. And this, of course, oh, I made that same mistake again. You would say that this would allied with the next key, but we actually get another D major chord that rotates the voices, D, F sharp, A, and D. Another D major chord, which I think in the key of G major is now our dominant. So the fact that the voice gets the chord gets reiterated, I'm going to move the modulation over 1, even though it doesn't really matter, because it's more or less articulating the same thing. It just looks a little bit nicer on the page. Here we have G, B, B, and E, which is E minor in first inversion, so another deceptive progression, passing tones in the lower voices. And then we have B, D, D, or B, D, B, and D. But this F sharp on the and of the beat contextualizes this as 3. So 6 going to 3, transitive progression, it usually goes in the other direction, but if it can go in one direction, why can't it go in the other direction? Typically it has to do with the going against the grain of the dominant, or the direction that would point you towards the dominant, but 3 can take you to the dominant, no problem. Bach uses 3 to go to the dominant the same way that he uses 6 to go to the dominant, so they're very similar chords in that way functionally. Here we have E, G, G, and C. That's C major in first inversion. And then notice how 4-6 often goes to 1, G, B, G, and B, with this D here, kind of a similar idea as what was happening on the previous beat. We have a 1 chord that gets fully contextualized. A 6 chord, it's like going down a fourth. 6 going to 3, down a fourth, 1 to 4, going down a fourth. And one's in first inversion, the other's in first inversion as well. Root position, and the voice or the chord doesn't get fully contextualized or fully spelled until the and of the weak beat. So 2 and 4 and. I was going to say something. Oh yeah, right. The 4-6. So 4-6 usually is connected via the leading tone in between the 6 and the 1. This is pretty much 100% of the time this is going to happen, and very seldom can you say that something's going to happen with 100% certainty in Bach's music, and I think this is one of them. 4-6 going to 1. If we don't get a fully voiced 7 chord as a passing chord between 4 and 1, we get the leading tone at least, and that's pretty consistent amongst all of Bach's vocal writing at least. But as we get ready for our perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major, we have C, C, E, and A. That's A minor in first inversion, 2-6. It's a typical normative cadential chord. Delayed passing tone in the tenor, D, A, D, and A. A thirdless dominant, which is very interesting because a dominant without the leading tone is kind of, I don't want to say pointless, because it's just, it lacks the same flavor, the same function. Or no, it has the same function, but really it's depriving itself of the tone that has the function, so it's very interesting to see a final cadence with this in the voices. It's very interesting. But then we have G, B, D, and G, which is our tonic triad in root position. And that just about does it for our analysis. So, like I said at the beginning of the chorale, apologies if you were here for a complete analysis with all of the instruments as well. I'm focusing primarily on Bach's vocal writing and really only on the chorale writing, so the instruments are beyond the purview of the analysis that I'm focusing on. But if you're interested in Bach's chorale harmonizations, you should go on this journey with me, because I've been analyzing every Bach chorale, one a day, and I'm 127 deep as of this episode. So if you'd like to follow along with me on this journey, feel free to subscribe, hit the notification bell. I upload once every day, and I am working my way through the BWV numbers. I have some assorted BWV numbers at the beginning of the playlist because I was not originally doing that, but I have since changed to follow the BWV numbers, and I'm doing them in numerical order. So if you have a particular request, feel free to leave a comment or send me a message. I'd be more than happy to break the order to accommodate you, but otherwise I'm following them in order because it gives me a way of organizing it a bit better. But that being said, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for continuing to support the channel, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow's analysis. I hope you take care.